All right, you're live, ma'am.
All right.
There we go.
Okay. Do I have to bang the gavel? Good morning, everybody. I want to thank Assemblymember Medina for working with me to put this hearing together, and thank you to the Higher Education Committee staff. Without their expertise, this hearing wouldn't have been possible. I'm honored to serve as the Veteran Affairs Committee Chair. It is of highest importance that we take care of our nation's veterans. They have, each and every one of them, committed to make every sacrifice possible, including the ultimate sacrifice in service and defense of our country. It is only right that when our veterans are at risk and we are in a position to defend them, that we do not fail. On the outset, it is my intention today that we paint a picture that all private it is not my intention today that we paint the picture that all private for-profit schools are bad actors or that they all provide poor quality education. Some of these for-profit schools do provide a good education, and let's be blunt, a lot of our public schools are not giving our veterans the flexibility they need to get through their education. This hearing will focus on Ovrsite and on Corinthian. I'm aware that because of the narrow focus today that we will not present a balanced perspective on the industry as a whole. We have asked some key players tasked with protecting students and student veterans to come and speak with us today in the wake of the recent closure of Corinthian colleges. Unfortunately, it is my understanding that there will almost certainly be other Corinthians. Our conversation here is not academic. It is in preparation for the future. Our goal is to learn about the structure for oversight of the for-profit private colleges, why veteran students are such an important part of the discussion. We want to reflect on the chain of events which ultimately led to the demise of Corinthian and hear from the witnesses what lessons they took away from the closure and recommendations they have going forward for improvement and change. And now I would like to see if Mr. Medina has a few comments.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you to Assemblywoman Irwin for inviting the Higher Education Committee to participate in today's hearing. In 1960, California made a commitment to an affordable, high-quality public higher education system. As a teacher for 35 years, I saw my students as their lives were transformed by colleges and universities. Over the last decade, budget cuts have met public funding for financial aid led many for-profit colleges to expand into new higher education marketplace. For many students, these institutions have provided an educational option that otherwise would not have existed. But a growing number of students believe that their institutions have left them with an education of questionable quality and insurmountable load of debt. The closure of Corinthian this past April showed that there are holes in the oversight of for-profit colleges. I introduced Assembly Bill 573 to help students that are harmed by that closure. But, as Ms. Irwin has stated, I think it's important that we also identify the actions necessary to prevent the next Corinthian. It is my goal that today's hearing will help us identify those changes, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Mr. Medina and I both appreciate our other colleagues being here today, and I want to give them a chance to make a comment or an introduction. Why don't we start with Ms. Brown? Or how about Mr. Chavez?
Well, I'm glad to having the hearing here. And I'm hopefully from the testimony, that's why I'll make the statement now, from the members, there would be a discussion of what is the, how do you define a veteran who's going off to college? I think there's areas that should be brought up. One would be their grade levels that they had retained, whether in high school before they joined the military. Look at how many of them have actually taken college classes while in the military, and looking to seeing their SATs, because I think it would help to the discussion of who's applying to the schools, and this is the issue. What are the admission requirements at the CSUs and the UCs, and do those actually meet the typical military veteran? Should we be looking at access to our CSUs and UCs by our military? and having a different measure. Second issue is I think we should also look at is what is the product that the profits provide that the UCs and CSUs do not provide. Product and understanding that many times people who have served, they get out, they'll be 24, 25, or 26 years old, will already be married. And if you have a young child, the ability to go to a state college Monday through Friday, 8 o'clock to 3 is not realistic if you have to put food on the table. So the program that allows a college access on Tuesday and Thursday night and all day Saturday so they can get a degree, plus with the ability to finish, and I'll just grab a number, 36 months with a degree, unlike attending a CSU that may take you 5 or 6 years to get a degree. That's why they would attend a for-profit. So I think ultimately the solution is recognizing who are the veterans, what they bring to the table, and also look at the product that and the timelines and the access that for-profits provide that our CSUs and UCs do not provide. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Chavez. Ms. Brown?
Thank you. I don't want to take up the time because I would love to hear what the conversation is going to be. And I just wanted to say that this has affected my district. I additionally supported Mr. Medina's legislation. And I believe that we need to look deeply and see how we can improve public institutions. But also don't put these institutions out of business because they do have a place in our society. So I don't want to take any more time. I just want us to get on with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Brown. Does anybody else have a comment? Mr. Mathis?
I apologize first off for my back and forth. I have Water Parks and Wildlife this morning as well. I'd just like to say I'm looking forward to what comes out of this hearing, to the answers. Being a young veteran myself, commanding troops, I've seen how the schools have helped benefit veterans in the long run, and I've also seen how they've been hurt by it. So I've got a few questions that I'll be asking along the way. And overall, I think it's great that we're doing this. That way we can really look and see the cause and effect and how to truly help our veterans with their education.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to make a comment? Mr. Frazier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As of last year, with our office running AB 2099 about the acknowledgement that there have been deficiencies in for-profit colleges to provide an education to our veterans, it was watered down, and I'm glad that you've picked up the ball and taken this issue to where it really needs to be, acknowledging that there's been predatory practices in this field, where they've had actually more recruiters than they have had instructors in these colleges. And then also, I think looking forward with the veterans is we're training them when they're serving in their military life, and we need to be able to acknowledge that they've been trained and give some kind of certification going forward so that they can shorten their college life and take that in consideration, because we're paying twice for that education. We're paying in the military, and then we're also paying through their Title 38 money to get a degree. So we have to look at that also so that we can actually get a better value going forward. And I look forward to fruitful outcome in this hearing, and I thank both of you for acknowledging this very worthy need.
Thank you. All right. Well, we'll start with our first two speakers, and I'll just, if I can ask Keith Boylan and LaTanya Johnson to please come up. And I'll just, as they're coming up, give a little background. CSAAVE, the California State Approving Agency for Veterans Education, is housed within CalVet. It is federally funded and operates under an annual reimbursement contract with the VA. In its role as the California Approval Agency, the primary function of CSAAVE is to review, evaluate, and approve quality education and training programs for veterans benefits. And so if I can ask both of you to open up and then be ready for questions. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Madam Chair, the members. My name is Keith Boylan. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Veterans Services at the California Department of Veterans Affairs. Thank you for the opportunity to provide this testimony, a little overview of CSAVE and what we do. I gotcha. Our objective at CalVet with the State Approving Agency program, it's, as you said, it's a contract through the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and our goal is primarily to protect against waste, fraud, and abuse of the GI Bill benefit for veterans throughout the state. This is done through the State Approving Agency is responsible for approving all institutions and programs and allowing them to receive those benefits and be funded with GI Bill benefits for the veterans at their institutions. Veterans can use their GI Bill benefits at any institution that has gone through the process with CSAVE and has received our approval. Our CSAVE has limited authority over the school's operations and no authority over its accreditation. Primarily, our responsibility is just approving the school and its programs. We do that from a variety of measures. The consistency of its programs, its graduation rates, its placement rates, its financial stability, and so on. There's a process that we do that through compliance surveys with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we also have the ability to do technical site visits at various points throughout the year on a drop-in basis. Recently, there's been some changes Assemblymember Frazier alluded to, and we thank him for his efforts to introduce and work with us closely on AB 2099. That's a program that's allowed California to develop reasonable criteria. In the Code of Federal Regulations, that authority is there for the states. As you know, various states are affected in different ways, and in California and is disproportionately affected by some of the challenges around the GI Bill Benefit Fund. A lot of that has to do with the amount of veterans in the state. A lot of these schools tend to headquarters out of California, and California also has its own way of doing things. So it allows us some flexibility in making sure our efforts meet the needs of California and the development of the reasonable criteria, and having that recognized as authority on the state level as well is helpful in our efforts to build that program around the specific needs of California. With me today is LaTanya Gardner. She's our program administrator for the State Approving Agency.
Good morning. I'd like to just say that the agency has been around for many years. CSAVE, we call it CSAVE. I have 11 staff, 3 seniors, and 9 other staff that review institutions, their applications for approval. They submit them to us, and we have folks throughout the state that administer the program along with me.
I understand that your agency, as it looks and takes care of veterans' benefits, looking out for how they're used. I have a question. How are the institutions, and that you're guided by federal laws and regulations?
That is correct.
But how are the institutions where veterans are using their benefits? How are they afforded due process in their evaluation of if veterans can or cannot use their veterans' benefits there? Sure. So I'd like to hear what your due process is on the institutions where you monitor.
So the schools are required to submit application. It's voluntary. No institution has to be approved to accept. They have to be approved if they want to serve veterans. The application process is very streamlined. It asks for a minimum amount of information, and there isn't really encoded in the or the Code of Federal Regulations, a means by which there is an appeal process, so to speak. It is a all or nothing. You either meet the standards or you do not. If you do not meet the standards, then you are not approved.
And so my question is, since it's all or nothing, what can you say a little bit more of how you determine that, and how do institutions make sure that they, are treated fairly, equally?
There are two types of institutions. There are institutions that will apply for programs that are either accredited, or institutions that apply for unaccredited programs. The first part of approval is that you have to meet the minimum standards. And the minimum standards for accredited institutions, in some cases, it is that you must meet the standards for accreditation. That's really simply what the requirements are. As long as you meet the minimum standards for your accreditation, then we will measure you against those standards, and then what the standards are in California for education. For example, if you are a public or a for-profit institution, your programs must meet the general accepted standards for whatever the program is. For example, if it's a nursing program, it has to meet all of the nursing standards for licensure in California. So that's how they are measured. And then for the unaccredited institutions and some of the accredited institutions, they minimally have to have been approved with the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary for 2 years and demonstrated that they have the ability to offer the programs, been successful with the programs before they can submit application to us. So that's the first bridge over into this. When you have 2 years of history, it kind of gives us an idea of whether or not you're going to continue to be successful as it relates to veterans. Once they submit the application, that's what we're measuring them on, generally accepted standards in the industry and what they include in their application. Even when they submit their application, and let's just say the application is denied for whatever reason, they can always reapply. We tell them very specifically when they submit their application what the standard is and where they do not comply. If they make changes to their business practices, their programs, their outcome requirements, then they can again submit an application for approval. So it never really ends. They will always have the ability to reapply.
What's the length of time between that? Suppose they lose their approval and they resubmit for approval again?
There is no timeline. There is no timeline. As long as they demonstrate that they meet the requirements, they can resubmit an application.
And I think part to your question there is we're required by law, it's within 30 days of receiving the application that they have to receive a response as to whether their application was approved or denied.
Or complete.
Mr. Mathis, did you have a comment on this question?
Yes. To piggyback on Assemblyman Medina's, with looking at the accreditations, what you're going to accept, what's deemed as acceptable, I mean, what are the criteria? Because you just said that it's either an all or nothing, you're in or you're out. And, there's a lot of these schools where you see them, they're accredited 1 year and they're not accredited the next year. And, Private Joe Snuffy, who's fresh out of boot, who's a National Guard soldier, doesn't know the difference. All he hears is an ad that says, go to this school, and we here to help veterans. So he applies, he goes through a 2-year course, and at the end of the day, it's not accredited for anything. He's got a piece of paper that's got his name on it that says, college degree, and then he decides a year later, you know what, I'm going to better myself, and I want to go to a university. And now he's got to retake 2 years worth of courses. So what is there as a safeguard, or is there?
Yeah, no, what LaTanya was talking about, and it kind of answers a bit of your question, and there's kind of two parts there. But when a school is accredited, as she said, we really rely heavily on the accrediting body's requirements, and much of our focus is based on whether that institution is meeting the requirements of their accrediting body and in good standing with their accrediting body. The second part to your question is whether they lapse out of accreditation or not. If a school is not accredited, there's an additional criteria that they're responsible for in order to achieve GI Bill benefits. An accredited school, their accreditation in being in good standing with that accrediting body kind of stands alone for the most part. We do have other measures that we can judge them by as well. But for
So other measures being
meaning with the federal, in the Code of Federal Regulations, it gives us the opportunity to look at a school, and if, for the most part, if a school is accredited, we have the option of accepting that accreditation as evidence of their standing and giving them their certification and approval for that reason. If by some chance they're not meeting the requirements of their accrediting body, however, their accreditation is intact, we still do have some opportunity there to make another decision.
Is there a guideline or criteria based on what is an acceptable accreditation body? Because there's different accreditation processes.
They have to be listed with the U.S. Department of Education. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Medina is going to have to leave in a couple of minutes, so we'll let him finish up.
In some instances, as in the case of Corinthian, the institution had accreditation, but I think your agency stopped their participation. Is that right?
It is.
Even though they still had accreditation.
Correct. Yeah, they were accredited the day they closed their doors.
Right. So there are other procedures that you then take to
exactly.
Besides
and
the accreditation. And how do you determine that?
It goes back to what I said earlier in terms of graduation completion rates, their placement and job rates, and the school's institutional financial stability. And in the case of Corinthian, the financial stability was the biggest question in that situation.
And you stopped your participation with Corinthian how much before they closed their doors?
We suspended them in June and withdrew them in August of 2014, and then they closed their doors in April of 2015.
Thank you.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask one question, then we'll go on to Assemblymember Frazier, and kind of complicated. Why did CSAVE ultimately take action against Corinthian? And it seems to me that we're really not getting to the more fundamental issue of the 90-10 rules and how these schools are taking advantage of that. We're allowing GI funds to be squandered at schools with an extremely low quality educational return. And why is CSAVE not going after these schools so that we don't end up in this type of situation? Isn't that ultimately the role that you're supposed to be playing?
It is. There's a lot of parts to that question there, but primarily, I mean, recently there's been a variety of schools that have closed, and if you look across the board, very few of those schools have been closed for the purpose of the value of their education. Primarily, the reason they've been closed is due to some financial instability and so forth. And this goes back to Assemblymember Chavez's questions earlier. I guess a little bit of background. When there was the reform in the GI Bill, the question back when folks first started coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, the big question was, these troops are coming back, particularly let's talk about California at least. The troops were coming back. They did have challenges. For the most part, when a veteran gets out, they're remedial in math or English and so on because they have spent some time in the military, and chances are they maybe weren't the best students prior to going into the military in some cases. So when they get out, they have some catching up to do, to say the least. And it's important to recognize that the public education system, and we work closely with the community colleges and CSU and UC system to develop better transitional pathways for veterans when they get out and try to enter that system, remedial or not, that they can engage that system and be productive in that system. Oftentimes, at that point, there was a big push to have them, obviously a lot of folks in the military, a lot of what they do every day is trade-based. So there was a big push towards the vocational programs and so forth. So there was some reform in the GI Bill late 2009-ish, which really changed things quite a bit. You were able to use GI Bill benefits for the first time at vocational schools to get certificates and a variety of other things. That was a very new thing. It changed the big picture quite a bit. And I think what we're seeing now is a big part of that. There's a financial model developed there that goes back to part of the 90-10 rule and so forth, that was developed out of that. And we're seeing now, I think, a business model for educational delivery that has hit some challenges. Their biggest challenge is a reduction in the amount of folks that are signing up and attending these schools. I'd say that's their biggest challenge right now. And that's setting off a variety of different, flipping a certain level of dominoes there that has really affected their financial stability in a lot of ways. There's some that you could argue do have questionable, they're not all created equal, let's say, in terms of their educational value. However, that's not always the thing that's brought to the forefront. The thing that really jumps out more so are some of the financial requirements in order to continue to do business and so forth. And the 90-10 rule is certainly one of those challenges. As you mentioned, the 90-10 rule was put in place, and it's created a challenge for veterans in particular. All schools across the country are required that no more than 90% of their funding be federal funding, Title IV money, and GI Bill benefits, when that reform was done, are not considered federal funding. So they fall into that 10% third-party funding, I guess you could call it. So in theory, if you have a veteran come to your school, that enables you to enroll 9 other veterans that are 100% on Title IV funds. So we have had some challenges with that. There is a certain amount of pressure and a certain amount of focus put on enrolling veterans in their schools for that reason. It certainly allows schools, for every veteran they get, as I said, they can enroll 9 more non-veterans on complete Title IV funds. So that certainly puts a lot of value on the veteran and a priority in getting them in there.
So in the case of Corinthian, it was basically financial instability, but we are also concerned with the educational outcome. Are these vets getting jobs, and is that the role of CSAVE to look at those type of issues, and was that considered at all in the Corinthian case?
Are you talking about whether or not they were placing students?
Whether or not they're placing students, whether or not students are defaulting on their loans, whether they're, are you looking at those type of things about the quality of education that these veterans are getting?
Yes. Typically what happens, though, is the only time we are looking at the programs in and of themselves is when they are submitting an application. There's nothing in the Code of Federal Regulations that requires that they report placement data to us, or anything, or any of the like, including graduation. We do look at the information. Our authority to do anything with it really just goes back to, will we continue approval of the program? For example, we had a little discussion earlier. The accrediting bodies set the standards for completion and placement. When an institution submits an application to us, now again, they have to do this basically annually. If they submit their program and they submit information to us that they are not meeting their accrediting body standards for outcome, meaning placement, graduation, we will not approve that program going forward for veterans. It may stay approved for other students to go into it, but they have to demonstrate that they meet the standards for accreditation at all times. Otherwise, we will not approve the program going in the next year. So they could have had it, for the sake of this conversation, Corinthian, they had it, their programs, they had all of their programs intact for veterans because at the time that they were submitting their application, they did meet the accrediting body standards.